This is the Paul Robeson Archives office. It was established in 1973 to collect and organize all of the available information on the late Paul Robeson. The prime responsibility for cataloging this sea of documents, writings, music scores, photographs, books, recordings, and film lies in the hands of his son, Paul Robeson, Jr. His is a truly singular task and a most difficult one, because there is so much material to gather from all over the world. It is also a labor of love. This documentary film is about the life of Paul Robeson. It was begun several months before he passed away in January of 1976. Much of the visual material came from this archive. Many hours were spent here poring over the material on this unusual man. There has unfolded the story of a man of prodigious abilities, and not just in drama, film, singing, sports, but in scholarship, profoundly so. And also, there has emerged the story of a man of extraordinary principle who refused to bend even 1 inch away from his convictions, no matter what the price. This, then, is the extraordinary story of an extraordinary man, Paul Robeson.
We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We're soldiers in this.
So I started as an actor, as an artist in the Provincetown Theater with Mr. Eugene O'Neill way back in the 20s. I did The Emperor Jones, and Those Children Got Wings with the distinguished, I did in London with the distinguished English actress Paul Robeson years ago. I came over way back in 1922. And not only came over, but had the privilege and great pleasure of playing a whole summer with Mrs. Patrick Campbell in the play, which was about the Negro South and then going back to Africa. I was to be some kind of a chieftain. I fall asleep at the end of the first act, and sort of in a dream, I sort of fall asleep as opposed to I whistle and being very gay, and before you know it, I'm back in Africa. And I tried my best falling asleep to whistle. And I still can't whistle, as you can hear me right now. I just can't whistle to this day. And so I broke out into a sort of a, Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go, into a very beautiful spiritual that I remembered as a child. And as I sort of hummed this, I heard a voice from the wings. Sing it louder, sing it louder. As if it were a part of the play. And Miss Wyborg finally saw the play later in the week in Liverpool. The play had really turned into a musical. Luckily for me, I got very nice reviews from it and found out that I was a singer. Finally went, I remember, to study with Madame Chern-René, a great singer at Juilliard, a great singing teacher. But it was very clear to me, even in those days, that I wanted to be a singer of the folk songs of my people. And I did not want to become a Wagnerian opera singer because I wanted my voice to come from inside me.
I first met that great artist, kind, generous, and gentle man, Paul Robeson, in 1922 in London. I never realized then that I would pay for him.
Dear Larry, one of the great authorities on our folk music and one of the great arrangers of our folk songs, just a master of the rhythm of our music, and our early programs, which more or less for 5 years were devoted specifically to the folk song of our own people.
It was a mere accident. I met him on the corner of 135th Street and 7th Avenue in March 1925. And he asked me, say, what are you doing tonight? I said, I'm not doing anything. He says, will you go down into the village with me? James Light, who had diarrhea directed him in the Emperor Jones and in all God's Children, both O'Neill plays. And so we went down in the village, and by sheer accident, he decided to sing some of my arrangements, which I had arranged in London, and I happened to join in with him. And James Light was so excited, he said, why don't you two guys give a program together? He says, I can arrange it for you at the Greenwich Village Theater. Well, that's the way it happened. We were frightened to death.
Now my soul is a witness. Yes, my soul is a witness.
Music critics were overwhelmed. One said that Robeson had a voice in which deep bells rang. Out of Paul Robeson rolled the rich heritage of his church experience with his beloved father, the Reverend William Drew Robeson, with whom he was especially close.
And my father was in that tradition. Every Sunday morning, it would be a rolling out of a great sermon, and now we bow down on bended knee, oh Lord. And it became like an opera.
Faithfulness we know, the Holy Bible tells us so. Shaved off his head just as clean as your hand. Strength became just like any other man. Now that's another witness. Yes, that's another witness. Oh, that's another witness. Yes, that's another witness.
I was quite astonished that people were willing to come and pay to hear me sing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and Nobody Knows the Trouble I See, which I had just sung in church.
I think his interest in folk song is the fact that he has a great love for human beings, for humanity, I would say. Therefore, he wanted to sing the songs of the folk, the ordinary person, perhaps the peasant, or even the downtrodden.
It was awesome. It was constant. It wasn't just into the centers of literary material. Wherever he went in the country, I don't care what country he was in, he found himself among the artists, he found himself among the people who sang songs or sang chants. He constantly wanted to know what everything meant. He wanted to know where it all came from. And then pretty soon, this enormous cranium of his, this genius that housed, this head that housed so much genius, he would go to Czechoslovakia, or he'd go to the Soviet Union, or he'd go to England, or whatever, and he would hear a song. And he would immediately translate that song to something that had to do with a tribe in Africa. Or hear a melody somewhere in Africa, and he would remember that he heard it being sung by the Welsh miners. Then he'd want to know how the hell did it all get there? Did the sailors bring it? Was it just a coincidence? What has been going on in this byway of life? And he sang in almost every language. He spoke many languages, but phonetically, those languages he didn't speak, he was able to learn phonetically and learn them meticulously. He was conscious about the highest form of the art, and he didn't want to be just an American singing a song of someone in another country. He wanted to get the nuances. He wanted to get the absolute. He wanted the people, when they heard him sing it, for them to assume that he came from that part of Ireland, that part of Wales, that part of Germany. So and he drove me crazy, because having set this standard, I then said, well, that's the only way to really find out what a song is.
To the songs of many peoples of the world, songs that I find very similar to my own, incidentally. All the folk music of the world might interest you very, are very similar in one respect. Not only because peoples have the same aspirations and feeling in scales. One scale of our music, which is predominant, is a so-called five-tone scale, sort of a big word for it, pentatonic. It can be played on the 5 black keys of the piano, which form a natural five-tone scale. And, for example, 2 groups of songs, mostly in this scale, and very similar to my own, are Chinese folk songs and Scotch Hebridean folk songs. And extremely interesting, again, will be that what you call the disjunct form, and F. Let's take the conjunct form, which would begin with the say the 4th on B flat. The study of the Negro spiritual has now characterizes my programs, which most of the critics have characterized as a program showing the unity, the relation of Negro music to all the music of the world. For example, in my programs, I start with an old English song like Over the Mountains. Over the mountains and over the waves, under the fountains and under the graves, under floods that are deepest, which Neptune obey, over rocks that are steepest, love will find out the way. Very nice idea, as a matter of fact.
Very nice.
So the idea of my concert is one suggestion that all men are brothers because of their music. And in my first group, I do an old English song. I do an old song from about the 11th or 12th century from Czechoslovakia. The Moravian chorales of about the 13th, 11th, and 12th centuries preceded the chorales upon which Johann Sebastian Bach based his music. So I take this, and then I do a Bach chorale, and then I create slight confusion by doing a Negro spiritual right in the middle, because it belongs there. Mm-hmm. And I found that out by going back to Africa. For example, there was an old, in East Africa, there is a chorale form that reached a form just pre-Bach in Europe. Very interesting. Chabala chapataye, chabala pataye, chabala patapataye, chabala pataye, mzungu mzungu wachine, mzungu mzungu wachine. Svati Vatsklavă, vive do Česky zemlje. The first was African, almost, and you say they're very similar. The first was African. The second is from the 11th century in Czechoslovakia with a chorale that just preceded Bach.
And so a young and magnificently gifted Paul Robeson was on his way in a career that would make him the best-known man in the world within 15 years. Paul Robeson, the son of a preacher who was once a slave. Paul Robeson, who grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, and from the very start exhibited the promise of greatness. Everyone in town, his neighbors, teachers, classmates, just knew that Paul was going to be somebody. But who would have guessed how much of a somebody he'd become? He was always big for his age, but as fast and agile as a cat. He was always involved in some sport or another, right through these early school days. Then as he entered college, his body began to really develop. And so did his mind, staggeringly so. He was a near-perfect student. He attended Rutgers College on a scholarship. From 1915 through 1919, he amassed Phi Beta Kappa honors. He was elected to the Cap and Skull Society, was debating champion, and was valedictorian of his graduating class. And bear in mind that the racist climate in America was never more intense. Robeson didn't fit into the typical bookworm mold. He now stood well over 6 feet and had muscles for days. He took that magnificent physique and he used it to win himself 13 varsity letters. However, he wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms by his fellow students. He was barred from singing in the campus glee club, and when he tried out for the football team, his teammates broke his nose and deliberately stomped on his hand, tearing every fingernail off of his hand. Years later, the memory still lingered. He became one of the greatest football players of all time. A great pass receiver, overwhelming offensive blocker, tackle, and the best defensive linebacker of his era. He was Rutgers University's first All-America football player. The sports headlines of the day tell it like it was. As great as he was, however, Paul Robeson was not great enough to be listed in the College Football Hall of Fame, even though the hall was at one time located right on the Rutgers campus. When he graduated Rutgers with highest academic honors, he enrolled in the Columbia University Law School. The campus overlooked Harlem, where he moved into an apartment. Here, the relatively unworldly young law student was exposed to a Harlem that was in the midst of its fabulous Renaissance era. It all had its impact on Paul. Politically, the Marcus Garvey African nationalist movement, with a following of tens of thousands, emphasized Africanness for Afro-Americans. It was in full swing. And then culturally, artists like Duke Ellington had become a regular at the Cotton Club. Duke's early compositions also stressed Africanness. In the field of education, Harlem proffered the intellect of W.E.B. Du Bois. In short, Harlem was booming with activity, and young Paul Robeson, fresh out of quiet New Jersey, drank it all in. Conversely, Harlem threw her arms wide open to him. He was drawn into film acting in the black-produced film of Oscar Micheaux. He was also invited to sing with a number of groups. On weekends, he played pro football, all this while doing brilliantly at Columbia Law School. Oh, and by the way, he managed to find time to fall in love and marry a striking young anthropologist, Eslanda Cardoza Good. He graduated Columbia with his law degree, but he met bias in the law firm he was working for and eventually quit the profession of law. Young Paul Robeson set his sights elsewhere. Armed with talent, brain, brawn, a brilliant and talented wife at his side, Paul Robeson was ready to take on the world. But was the world ready for him? Paul Robeson arrived in London, England, to appear in the overseas version of the new musical Showboat, written by Jerome Kern, lyrics by Oscar Hammerstein. Actress Marie Burke played the role of Julie.
We've been rehearsing for about a week, and Paul was late because he'd been playing in New York. We just finished, and there was a break when the door opened, and standing in the doorway was a tall, distinguished gentleman, and we all knew that it was Paul Robeson. Jerome Kern, who was 5'2", 3", perhaps, rushed from the piano stool, nearly sent it flying, and put his arms around Paul's middle, because that was as far as he could get. Said, "My God, Paul, it's marvelous to see you. Now come on over here. I want to hear my song." Old Man River sung by you, because I had you in mind when I wrote it. And Paul just walked up and put his arm on top of the piano. And this beautiful voice, this organ of a voice, came out and he sang Old Man River, and we were all in tears.
That old man River, he must know something, but don't say nothing. He just keeps rolling. He keeps on rolling along. He don't plant potatoes, he don't plant cotton. Them that plants them, he soon put a garden. But old man River, he just keeps rolling along.
It was the song with which Paul Robeson would be most closely tied during his career. He would sing it again in the 1935 film version of the play. Over the years, he gradually changed the Oscar Hammerstein lyrics from what originally included several repetitions of the word nigger. Years later, Robeson would transform Old Man River from a song of black indolence to one of resistance and defiance to oppression.
You show a little grit and you land in the jail. But I keep laughing instead of crying. I must keep fighting until I'm dying. And old man River, he'll just keep rolling
Robeson was the toast of England. He was accorded unprecedented acclaim for a black man. He was revered by the theatrical lions because of his impressive 1930 portrayal of Othello in London. His prodigious intellect attracted the scholarly. His voice, lent to singing folk music, endeared him to the working class. His awesome physical presence attracted artists from all over the world who sought to immortalize him in his prime.
When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down.
Through it all, he continued to pore over books on music, anthropology, and especially languages. The Robeson legend was growing, and so was his concert itinerary. He visited and performed on 3 continents, traveled extensively with his wife and their son, Paul Jr. Eslander, an anthropologist, had scholarly interests that meshed perfectly with her husband. They were both about the mutuality of mankind. Robeson was especially impressed with Russia for a number of reasons. He found no color bar there in these times, the 30s. He was taken with the political system of the Soviet Union. He also found strong similarities between the Russian and African cultures and languages.
Хорошие ребята, жизнь по-своему переделают, людьми станут настоящими людьми.
His comments were picked up by the world press, but nary an eyebrow was raised, not even here in America. Robeson's film career was also mushrooming. He was the first black man to make motion pictures that had a semblance of dignity and character. He was far from satisfied, but nonetheless, roles such as the lead in Emperor Jones were extraordinary.
Mr. President, now, King Brutus
No, somehow that don't make enough noise. Smithers, cigarette. Smithers, you has just had an audience with the Emperor Jones.
The scholar, actor, singer in Paul Robeson all function now in perfect synchronization toward a single goal: to show the world that the black man had a unique and potent culture that rivaled that of any other culture in the world. And who could argue with this man? There he was, as living proof, black, beautiful, and brilliant. In 1935, Robeson made another film, Sanders of the River. Again, an African theme. But the editing turned out a final product in a story far removed from what he thought it would be. It turned out validating the colonization of Africa. Robeson was furious with the end result, and he walked out on the premiere performance. And so in his next film, he had a clause written into his contract that gave him final approval. He was much happier with the result of the second film, a film story about the descendant of an African king who was in Europe but determined to find his way back to his roots.
Yes?
The gentleman asked us to call.
Which gentleman? Appointment?
Yes, sir.
This way.
Don't call him, sir.
No? Who shall I call him?
Call him nothing.
These people want to see Mr. Donizetti.
Name, please?
Mr. John Zinger.
And Mrs. Singer.
Page. Take a seat.
Mr. and Mrs. John Zinger.
Ah, my friends, at last. I thought you were never coming. Look after the lady. I'm delighted to see you. I cannot tell you what a joy it is to me. We'll waste no time. To work at once. Now, come on. No explaining. Come along. No, stop. The breathing is all wrong. You see, the muscles for the breathing, they come from the diaphragm. So, and the voice, it comes from here. So, you see, voice, breathing, voice. Now, I say, another note. No. Chin up. So. Now, again. And now, we will try escape.
You want me to do that?
Yes. See. Good. Now it's still higher.
Well, I came here to sing, not to make these noises.
But my dear fellow, Mr. Donington really wants to help you. It's part of your training.
I don't want any training. You smack me in the stomach and I sing la la la. Boys been able to sing on the docks without being smacked in the stomach. And what's more, I can't sing with all this stuff on. I like to be comfortable. I'm not a tailor's dummy.
John.
Well, if they want me to sing, I gotta be free, not trussed up like a chicken.
The mantle of fame had an unusual effect on Paul Robeson. He gravitated more and more to the working class of people. His songs were of them and for them. By 1937, he was booking most of his concerts with ticket prices that the poor could afford. As Robeson developed as an artist, so did he develop as a humanist. He resolved to lend himself to the cause of oppressed people wherever they were, whatever color they were. In the late 30s, as fascism started its bloody sweep across Europe, Robeson supported the loyalist forces in Spain, who were fighting almost single-handed against fascist German tyranny. He did so by going to Spain, out among the loyalist fighting men, and by giving concerts.
They wanted to take you.
But you're courageous children. But you're courageous children. But you're
This kind of artistic militancy won Robeson friendships with people like Nehru of India and a young Kenyan who would later become a feared and respected leader of his people, Jomo Kenyatta. Back in America, the tensions were building as World War II was about to erupt. It was Paul Robeson who found a song that seemed to provide the unifying force that America needed at the time. It was called Ballad for Americans.
In 76 the sky was red, thunder rumbling overhead. Bad King George couldn't sleep in his bed, and on that stormy morn, old Uncle Sam was gone.
What's your name, buddy? Where are you going? Who are you?
Are you an American?
Am I an American? I'm just an Irish, Negro, Jewish, Italian, French, and English, Spanish, Russian, Chinese, Polish, Scots, Hungarian, Litvack, Swedish, Finnish, Canadian, Greek, and Turk, and Czech, and double-Czech American.
With the outbreak of World War II, Robeson threw his full energies into the war effort. He gave endless free concerts to raise American war bonds. He toured for the USO. He loudly stated and deeply believed that if blacks helped to defeat fascism, America would end racism and give the black man his due.
Bill and song, from the plains and mountains we have sprung to keep the faith with those who went before. Old Sam put on a three-cornered hat.
Robeson was roundly applauded in America for his patriotism. His continued public expressions of admiration for the Soviets raised no hackles whatsoever, because Russia was an ally during these war years. He was perhaps unusual at that time in being, as he has so many times been ahead of his time. He had been by then what we used to call a premature anti-fascist. That is, he became aware of fascism and its dangers in the early 30s and resolved to fight against it every way he could, and went to Spain and so on. But in the 40s, when everyone agreed that the Axis had to be defeated, he also said that in fighting against fascism and their kind of racism, we had to at the same time fight against black oppression here and against racism in the United States. And as a matter of fact, I recall his calling the racists and the Ku Klux Klan and so on in the U.S. as the cousins, if not the brothers, of Hitler's Nazis. And that was unusual then. He was an early civil rights fighter in that sense, since he was at the same time as the war bond rallies were going on, and he was one of the champion fundraisers for those kinds of things. He was vocally and publicly very critical of racism in the United States, and that it was absolutely necessary to eradicate it. As a former athlete, he was angry that at this late date there were no blacks playing Major League Baseball. And so he led a delegation before the Major League club owners, demanding that the color bar be broken. It wouldn't be very long afterwards that this young man would benefit from the militant action of Paul Robeson. Robeson's star continued to rise. He was a sellout concert attraction. He received endless awards from labor groups, many ethnic organizations, Greek, Jewish, and the like, and several honorary degrees from colleges like Morehouse in Atlanta and Howard University in Washington, D.C. Even his own alma mater, Rutgers University. And then came the coup de grace. In 1943, he opened on Broadway in Othello, the first time a black man would play Shakespeare's Moor on Broadway. He would play the role a total of 3 times over a 30-year span, but it was the Margaret Webster production in 1943 that would go down as the definitive portrayal of the role for all time.
I had seen Robeson play Othello in London quite a few years earlier, and I frankly hadn't thought that he was very good. But he said to me then that he himself didn't think he was very good, and that now he had studied and restudied the role, and he felt that he was ready to play it, and why couldn't we do it together? And I was enthusiastic about this idea, particularly if I could have got Maurice Evans to play Zaza. I couldn't persuade Maurice to do it, nor could Paul or I, between us, persuade any other New York management to take the risk of doing a play in which a black man, A, made love to, and B, murdered a white woman. We finally got management, and it wasn't then an altogether easy job to get actors to do it, especially at this moment. We got Joe Ferrer and Uta Hagen. Now, Joe Ferrer had never played Shakespeare in his life. Uta gave from the beginning a beautiful performance at Desdemona. And Paul brought qualities with him which I never have seen equaled before or since. The moment he stepped onto that stage, he was not only a black man, but he was a great black man, a man of stature. Somehow or other he put the play in focus. The opening night in New York is something I never will forget. It was the late summer of 43, wasn't it? Ran through the 43-44 season. And it was one of those nights that absolutely everything went right, and the whole theater sort of caught fire.
It is the cause. It is the cause, my soul. Let me not name it to you, you chaste stars. It is the cause. Yet I'll not shed her blood, nor scar that whiter skin of hers than snow, and smooth as monumental alabaster. Yet she must die, else she'll betray more men. Put out the light, and then put out the light. One more, and this the last. So sweet was an air, so fatal. I must weep, but they are cruel tears. This sorrow's heavenly. It strikes where it doth love.
It was a breathtaking performance that won him the coveted Diction Award. Robeson had poured endless hours into preparing for the role. He even went so far in quest of special nuances as to rehearse certain passages in several languages.
More than pertains to diese Bräuel in Battle, als was zum Streit gehört und werd der Schlacht. Und wenig lehren dich von dem Lauf der Welt, als was zum Streit gehört und werd der Schlacht. Therefore little shall I grace my cause in speaking for myself. Drum wenig schmuck, wo leicht meine Sache red ich für mich. Et je sais dire pas des choses de ce vaste monde qui me rapporte au fait de guerre et de bataille.
I seem to remember reading when you came over in 1930 that you made a special study of English speech for playing Othello. Have you done the same this time?
Well, sort of once. Let's go back to 1930, which was the very definite time. Of course, in America, as I say, I had just come over from America, and we like to say pass and chance and do for the morning dew. And I happened to pick up an old script of Shakespeare, and the dew was very clear. It was D-I-E-W, and it was not chance, C-H-A-U-N-C-E, so it was dew, like in lieu of, and chance and dance. Very, very Shakespearean. And one terrible, difficult sound was my, almost at the beginning of the play, my services, which I have done the signory, my services. I would say my services. I had to work on that very But later I took some special work at the University of London, and also in my university days I majored in English, and I have records from the earliest time, from time of Anglo-Saxons, as a matter of fact, through Chaucer. And of course, since I worked on my songs with Roger Quilter, and I would have to use the role, I couldn't walk out here and say, Drink to me only with thine eyes, and I will pledge with mine. It's got to be very, drink to me only with thine eyes, and I will pledge.
I think Paul Robeson had a good beginning in that he grew up in an environment where he was reminded of the fact that he had responsibility. And he was the first artist activist, black or white, in this country, who saw that his role extended far beyond the stage, and that when the curtain fell, that wasn't the end of his act and the end of his commitment, and that the broader community needed some attention and needed some commitment from the artist.
I feel that this bears a good deal on the credibility of the jealousy, that a fellow comes from a different culture. For example, suppose an English lad married, say, a girl from Malaya, and the Malayan Iago started on him. Well, he might not quite know what to do. This is very important, I feel, in the development.
The bewilderment is, in fact, a matter of him being a stranger in the society.
That's one of the things that would bear on the jealousy.
But you're not trying to push the jealousy out of the window, are you?
Obviously, you can't, but this is an extremely important point, too. As Othello says, that he kills not in hate, but in honor. And he says to Iago, I didn't see it, I didn't think it, I slept the next night well. I found not Cassio's kisses on her lips. And if I had not known it, it had been quite some other thing. But so it wasn't just the act of infidelity, it was the destruction of himself as a human being, of his human dignity. And may I add, in thinking of the part myself, that I related that dignity not to myself personally, say, in a modern society, but to my whole people, important in Othello's defense of what he calls his honor and his dignity. She wakes.
Who's there? Othello,
I, Desdemona.
will you come to bed, my lord?
Have you prayed tonight, Desdemona?
Aye, my lord.
If you bethink yourself of any crime, unreconciled as yet to heaven and grace, solicit for it straight.
Yes, my lord, what may you mean by that?
Well, do it and be brief. I will walk by. I would not kill thy unprepared spirit. No, heaven forfend. I would not kill thy soul.
Talk you of killing?
I do.
I know you say anything.
Which I so...
Life and soul. Pay for the very last.
Sweet soul, take heed of perjury. I so...
Gave it him. Then what is he done?
Why, it was almost too much, all of this coming out of a single human being. The whole nation and Western free world seemed to stand up and applaud Paul Robeson. He was a symbol that countless parents urged their children to grow up and try to be like. He was, quote, a credit to his race, unquote, a true giant among men. At a mammoth birthday party celebrating his 44th birthday at the 17th Regiment Armory, a galaxy of celebrities turned out. Mary McLeod Bethune proclaimed Paul Robeson as the tallest tree in our forest. Robeson now stood at the mountaintop of popularity. The valley lay ahead.
We're soldiers of the cross.
World War II was over. The defeat of the Axis powers triggered jubilant scenes like this all over the world. The joyous celebrations rang with a hope for the future, that there would be justice and prosperity for all. But none of these celebrations were without the sad remembrance of the countless lives that made victory possible. A particular national sorrow was the death of President Roosevelt. Paul Robeson would read Carl Sandburg's eulogy to President Roosevelt during that period of national mourning. As the world settled into peace, Paul Robeson continued in his sea of many pursuits. He had broadened his study of world language, deepened his analysis of languages, and by now he was competent in some 30 languages: Welsh, Swedish, Chinese, French, Spanish, German, 8 African languages, and Japanese. He also continued his activism in the trade union movement that he had begun in the 30s. Harry Truman was now president of a nation that still seemed unable to solve the problem of racism. The post-war grab for jobs rekindled old conflicts and hatreds.
But those of us who were involved in the Second World War, some of us really felt that in the struggle against fascism, with all the things that we had been propagandized by our own government, that we were told about all the evils of the Axis powers, that if we were to participate fully and to give of ourselves in this struggle against fascism, that when we came back, part of the conquering armies, the victorious horde, that we would, as a group, as blacks, be looked upon by the larger society with infinitely different eyes, with greater compassion, with greater care, with a greater sense of warmth and camaraderie. That we would begin to participate fully in all that the United States had to offer, the American way of life, quote unquote, had to offer. And most of us returned to an excruciatingly cruel experience. There was an intense reaction by the white community in this country, particularly in the South. They gouged out the eyes of a war hero by the name of Isaac Woodard. There was a campaign of lynching and shooting and murder that was, and they said, in fact, that it was now to put the niggers back in their place. We had been to Europe, we'd been to Asia, we'd fought in the war, we'd learned all these things, we'd had a taste of freedom, or at least had been propagandized towards that end. And now that we were back, it was time for us to understand what our real position was.
The Ku Klux Klan grew. Lynchings and brutality scarred the nation. On September 23, 1946, thousands of black and white Americans met at the steps of the Lincoln Monument in Washington as members of a 100-day American crusade to end lynching, co-chaired by Paul Robeson and Albert Einstein. President Truman received a delegation from that crusade in his White House Oval Office. Robeson led that delegation and read a petition asking that Truman include in his next message to Congress a recommendation for the passage of federal anti-lynching legislation. Truman refused, and Robeson told him flatly that if the United States government didn't stop lynching, black people would. Robeson also stepped up his criticism of America's involvement in Africa. As chairman of the Council on African Affairs that he founded in 1937, he called for support of African independence and rallied behind a strike by South African gold miners. He raised a hue and cry against the economic rape of Africa by Western powers. Now remember now, these were the late 40s, and what Robeson was doing, criticizing America, well, you just didn't do those things, especially if you were a black man, however famous. In 1948, former Vice President Henry Wallace was running for the presidency on the new Progressive Party ticket that Robeson helped found. Robeson saw Wallace as far more preferential to Harry Truman, who was from Missouri, and his running mate Alvin Barkley from Kentucky. Also running for that nomination were states' writers Strom Thurmond and Fielding Wright, all vying for the Democratic nomination. Thomas Dewey was a Republican nominee. Wallace carried a pinko label, however, but Robeson gave him his full support, campaigning endlessly across the country. The pinko label was gradually put on Robeson. Wallace was defeated by Truman for the Democratic nomination. Truman would be the surprise victor over the heavily favored Thomas E. Dewey. Robeson began to get bad press. Increasingly, his name provoked controversy. His support of Wallace, his friendship with Russia, and his oft-expressed admiration for many aspects of socialism, as well as his close friendship with New York City Councilman Benjamin J. Davis of the Communist Party, all served to make the very mention of Robeson's name in some circles cause for argument. But Robeson would not bend. He maintained his Soviet ties publicly. He knew that his highly lucrative artistic career was in jeopardy now, and that he would be vilified. But Paul Robeson was an unusual man, reared with high moral principles by a highly principled father. It was on this moral bedrock that he would take his stand. Never compromise your principles, no matter what. Never take low. Robeson had long since concluded that the plight of the underprivileged was brought on by the abuses of privilege. He saw this as the root of Africa's troubles, and of Afro-America, and of many other exploited peoples. And he said so in full face of America's Cold War with Russia.
It became the concerted effort of the reactionary forces in this country to stay that, to not only mute it, but to turn it back as strongly as possible. It was very hard to turn us against one another on a one-to-one basis, and just on a black-white basis. They had to find the handle, and the handle was communism. And on the one hand, here we were, clearly the allies of the Soviet Union and the Yugoslavians and Tito et al., who were blown up as great heroes and great allies in the Second World War. Then we were told, those of us who expressed any love for Russian art, whether it was Tolstoy or Prokofiev or anything, that all of a sudden there was this new turn of events. None of this was kosher. Nothing Russian was acceptable. And this wave, the wave of reactionaryism began to build and build and build, and communism became clearly the target. And anyone who spoke about integration, anyone who spoke about labor, anybody who spoke about pulling together, anybody who spoke about anything that said that there is the Jeffersonian concept is a beautiful concept. Let's try to pull it. Let's fill it. Let's fulfill that mandate. Became a clear target for reactionaries. And they set up many instruments with which to do this. The most important, the most powerful is HUAC, House Un-American Activities Committee.
Questions came from all directions with the same theme. Is Robeson a communist? He swore under oath before a California state legislative hearing that he was not a member of the Communist Party. But still, the questions came. There was indeed a national climate of fear. Red baiting was rampant in those days. The editor of Harlem's Amsterdam News relates an incident in Harlem that illustrates some of the tensions that existed at the time. Baseball pitcher Don Newcomb was in this very bar when Paul Robeson entered with some friends, one of whom spotted the Brooklyn Dodger hero and innocently expressed a wish for Newcomb's autograph.
He, Paul Robeson, got up, went over to Newcomb's table, and said, Don, look, I was sitting right there. He said, Don, one of your fans over here would like to have your autograph. And I was stunned as everybody else. Newcomb went into a rage, started to rant, and said, get away from me. I don't want to have nothing to do with you. I'm getting ready to go in the army to fight your kind of people. Well, as I said, everybody was stunned. What was his reaction? Looked at him, and Robeson started to, he rose up because Paul could get angry very fast, you see. And when Robeson started to rise up again, Newcomb stood up And when Newcomb stood up, then there was these two giants, and both of them were giants, in this small red rooster bar. And pretty soon, I mean, the people haven't heard this. One guy sitting there said, I don't know, but nothing's going to happen to Paul. And I saw a guy pull his leg, see? And by that time, I mean, it was not a matter of choosing up sides. It was just a matter of everybody coming to Paul's side and Newcomb back down.
Robeson was barred from several public and broadcast appearances. Even Eleanor Roosevelt succumbed to the growing disenchantment with Robeson. Paul Robeson toured overseas on a heavy concert schedule, and true to form, he refused to avoid going to Russia. During that tour, he went to Paris to participate in the World Peace Congress, better known as the Paris Peace Conference. It was attended by delegates from 60 countries, including artist Pablo Picasso and W.E.B. Du Bois. Robeson delivered a short, unprepared speech that intensified his troubles back in America when it was reported. Dr. Du Bois recalled the most explosive part of that speech.
I went to Paris to attend the great Paris Peace Congress, which was, I think, on the whole, the greatest meeting of human beings I ever attended. It was a magnificent meeting. I took part and especially talked about colonies and emancipating colonies. Paul Robeson flew from Prague and took part and said that he didn't believe that colored men would ever join in any war against Russia.
That statement caused strong reaction back in the States. Many thought the remark unpatriotic. Others found it treasonable. In the midst of that reaction, Jackie Robinson, whose entrance into Major League Baseball was at least partly due to Robeson's early advocacy, made this voluntary statement before a hearing committee in Washington.
I've been asked to express my views on Paul Robeson's statement in Paris to the effect that American Negroes would refuse to fight in any war against Russia because we love Russia so much. I haven't any comment to make except that, on that statement, except that if Mr. Robeson actually made it, it sounds very silly to me.
Well, his reaction was one of great compassion for Jackie Robinson. He said that he must have suffered for what they made him do, and suffered a long time. So instead of feeling, I told you so, or any gloating over Jackie Robinson's change of heart, he only felt sorry for Jackie Robinson.
Perhaps none of the hatred and vilification thrown at Robeson ever rivaled what he encountered in 1949. The summer of that year, he scheduled a concert for the benefit of the Harlem chapter of the Civil Rights Congress. It was to take place in Peekskill, New York. The forces of anti-Semitism and anti-black were wedded to the forces of anti-communism, and they descended on a mixed crowd of 20,000 persons who had come to hear a man named Robeson sing folk songs about freedom.
Coming along here is another group of veterans. Apparently they have broken up their parade into sections. Police have detoured the traffic to keep the street on which the veterans are parading free of cars. All cars have been circling around the area, entering the concert grounds from what would amount to the rear. There's a group of young boys here yelling at the people from their cars. There's been the first bit of violence. I don't know who started it. Police have grabbed someone here. Police are pushing everyone back. The parade is broken up at the entrance, and the veterans are running back here. Police helicopter is overhead. The first bit of violence. The situation has gotten very tense there. There's no longer any order to the parade, just men moving back and forth on the highway.
Oh, this is horrible. Killing cowardice, hanging, desperately to keep these people back. The police are fighting the cops, and they are beating up a Negro. They're beating up, not the clubbing him, they're clubbing him.
You see, Paul was fine as long as, as long as he was a singer and an actor and an entertainer and a concert artist and everything else. That was fine. That was acceptable. But when he began to more, because there had been a history before the point that you're talking about, the late 40s, when he began to more actively speak out against the oppression of black people and his international point of view, then that wasn't acceptable, and that's when the attack began to happen. When an artist began to say, "Well, I am a citizen, and I understand the importance that politics have in my own life, and economics and all of these things," it began to intelligently speak upon and about these issues. Then that was not that's when he began to undergo what you described as the turning point of this fusillade, this massive attack to destroy him. A curtain of silence fell over Robeson. It was as though he had been obliterated with a giant eraser. From the best-known man on earth, he became a man whose name could only be whispered. The final blow came from the U.S. State Department. His passport was revoked.
Not only was I not allowed to go out, but I was also prevented from actually appearing in my own land. Concert halls were denied to me for many years. I was refused theaters. I have never been on American television, for example. That is, I've been blacklisted, as have many of my colleagues in America for whatever reason. As you saw the other day, Arthur Miller was in difficulty. But in many of our cases, it meant that we couldn't even. I have been able to practice my craft there. So I would say, no, you can't. I do not regret, in any sense, what I have done. I had some of my friends feel I could have done things in other ways. One has to do them as one sees life. I regret. I can't even use the term regret. I'm very proud, in one sense, of any contribution I've been able to make to the struggles of my people. So if you want freedom, you have to suffer sometimes.
Basic stance that he always took, one of the elements in his uncompromising position, is that he felt that his own personal success could not in any way be used to push aside the oppression of blacks, of his whole people in America. And he made that not just a national issue, but an international issue. And the cry was going up, well, you shouldn't expose America's internal problems on the international arena. He said, on the contrary, everywhere I go, I'm going to do that. Everywhere in the world, I'm going to call attention to the fact that there is no democracy, no equality for blacks in America. So that was one reason. The second reason is that he felt that, and he said quite definitely, that blacks should claim their rights and take them, not beg for them.
Then something unexpected happened. The black community stood up and threw its arms around Paul. His own people, for whom he had fought so hard and long, and had sacrificed so much for, came to his defense. He had a platform now, and he had an audience.
I've had a very tremendous success at home. Do a great deal to support, which would interest you, from the Negro people. In the Negro churches, I had chances to sing. And my whole career has been reestablished in America by way of the Negro churches. Very interesting.
Looking back, is that in spite of everything they did and tried to do to Dad, to isolate him, to crush him economically, politically, even physically, in the sense that he was followed, he was all kinds of things. He survived, and he survived without compromising, without, as he put it, stepping back 1,000th part of 1 inch. And not only survived, but bit by bit, from the times in 1950 and 51 where people were so frightened that many friends of his wouldn't cross the street to say hello, or would just step aside, or even cross to the other side of the street, not to be seen with him. With some very fascinating exceptions. For instance, at that kind of time, Dizzy Gillespie spoke of his friendships with Paul Robeson from the stage of the Apollo Theater, and Charlie Parker came from wherever he was to step on stage at a rally that Dad was speaking and said, yeah, Paul Robeson's my friend, I don't care what they say about him. So there were some very courageous and very moving exceptions to that.
He used to come to see me. I remember one time in the midst of his troubles, the troubles that he was having with the government and denial of opportunity to pursue his livelihood. He'd just been at a meeting. There was a meeting on 125th Street, and I was appearing at the Apollo at the time. And I was in the audience, to listen to him speak. And I went back to the theater, and then I got a telegram a little later saying that he was in the show. He went and caught the performance, but he didn't come backstage because he didn't want to subject me to any kind of a harassment or anything. I called him up and I say, if I got to be harassed by your presence, I'll take it. That'll be my cross to bear. Let me bear my own cross. Yes, because he was really something special.
From abroad came waves of support and sympathy. 16 members of British Parliament petitioned the U.S. State Department to let Paul Robeson go. Without a passport, Robeson could not leave the country, but even that didn't cut him off from the world that loved him so. He gave an incredible concert at the Canadian border before tens of thousands who were standing on the other side. It went largely unreported. You went through the years and you've examined other years where the full heat was on this man.
Yes.
And the crux of the question was whether or not he was a communist.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to say about it?
Well, actually, the things for which he was persecuted, like the Council on African Affairs, were things which today are not considered subversive. Of course, after the African countries have now achieved their independence, it's all right to be for independence of Africa after the fact. But his beliefs, as you know, he testified that he was not, at one time, he testified that he was not a member of the Communist Party. Then he stopped he refused to make any such statements because that was being used against people for denial of passports or denial of employment, and he refused to take an oath because he was opposed to it in principle. But in terms of his own beliefs, he had, through his humanistic concern, through the brotherhood of man concept, he had developed the idea, as others did of our people, like Dr. Du Bois and Ben Davis Jr. and others, that we needed to have a more ethical form of society than we have now.
He gave a transatlantic concert by telephone for the Welsh miners in Wales, perhaps one of the most moving and emotional of his long concert career.
Hello, Paul Robeson. On behalf of the South Wales miners and all the people gathered at this ice Deadwood, I extend to you warm greetings of friendship and respect. Our people deplore the continued refusal of your government to return your passport and to deny you the right to join with us in our Festival of Song. We shall continue to exert what influence we can to overcome this position.
My warmest greetings to the people of my beloved Wales, and a special hello to the miners of South Wales at this great festival. It is a great privilege to be participating in this historic festival. All the best to you as we strive toward a world where we all can live abundant, peaceful, and dignified lives. While the moon her watch is keeping, oh,
awarded the Stalin Peace Prize, but he couldn't go to Russia to claim it. He received it instead in New York. Dr. Du Bois was also a recipient.
I can recall when I was a accredited correspondent at the United Nations, Robeson won the Stalin Award, and Robeson came back to the United States. I was sitting in a press room there on the third floor, and I said to some of the guys there, you know, hey, how about it? Let's go over and I know where Robeson is. Let's go over and interview him on the Stalin Award. And a shout went up, hey, have you lost your mind? And I said, what do you mean? Man, look, you know, I mean, the FBI be around that place so much that, you know, you probably couldn't get in. And if you get in, I mean, you know, you got a tag on you. So I said, well, I'm going over. And the guy said, you're really going? I went over, and I interviewed him. And on my way home, when I was living in Brooklyn, when I got to Brooklyn that evening, got out of my car in front of my house, Park Place, 2 FBI men actually had tailed me from Manhattan, too. And they stopped me on the street and talked to me, asked me, because I asked, well, you know, why are you following me? I said, is it because I interviewed Paul Robeson today?
From his Jumel Terrace apartment in Manhattan, he recorded and sent a film message to the 1957 World Youth Festival in Moscow.
Здравствуйте. It is indeed a great privilege to be able to say a few words to this historic conference of the youth of the world, demanding peace and friendship among all the peoples of the earth. And it is a source of deep regret that many of us here in America are not able to be with you in person. But know that thousands and thousands in our land want peace, cultural exchange, and friendship, as do you. I recall vividly the days of my own son's youth, spent with many of you in the Soviet Union, in England, and in other lands. He also sends his warmest greetings. All success in these most important deliberations. Сердечный привет to all of you. Water boy, where are you hiding? If you don't come, I'm gonna tell your daddy. There ain't no hammer that's on this mountain that rings like mine. That rings like mine. I done bust this rock, boys, from here to Macon, all the way to the jail, boys. Yes, back to the jail. It's part of a work song that you've often heard me sing, I'm sure.
Finally, the U.S. State Department was forced to yield to the crush of protests from around the world, as well as from the U.S. Supreme Court ruling. In July of 1958, Robeson's passport was returned after 8 long years.
Most importantly, however, were the questions raised by the State Department as to my political opinion. Here's a question of whether one who wants to sing and act can have, as a citizen, political opinion. And in attacking me, they suggested that when I was abroad, I spoke out against injustices to the Negro people in the United States. I certainly did. And the Supreme Court Justice just ruled, Judge Warren, in the segregation cases, that world opinion had a lot to do with that ruling, that our children, Negro children, can go to school like anybody else in the South. I'm very proud to have been a part of directing world opinion to precisely that condition. The second, that I fight for the independence of the colonial peoples of Africa. Bandung, the colored peoples of the world assembled and made it clear that nobody is going to tell them what to do. They're going to have the independence. I'm proud of that. The third, that I fight for peace and friendship with the Soviet Union. At Geneva, the President of the United States made it clear that nobody wants to go to war with the Soviet Union. No Americans want to fight them. And I presume certainly the Negro people of the United States don't want any war with them either. Nobody does, because we want peace and friendship in the world. And rather absurd that the Soviet farmers can be here in the United States, that Baptist preachers can be in Moscow and farmers, that I'm not allowed to travel because of my friendship, open spoken friendship, that's right, for the Soviet people and for the peoples of all the world. And I want to be able very soon, I hope, to pursue my career as a singer, as an actor. Still have a pretty good voice rolling around, they tell me yet. Water boy, where are you hiding? And I want to play a fellow.
Almost immediately, he was off on a triumphant world concert tour. Incredibly, he showed not bitterness nor resentment. It was a spectacular tour spanning England, Wales, France, and Russia. It was a standing room only affair wherever he went. The gentle warrior, the man of unbending principle, had returned.
Русскую народную песню «Ноченька» Поль Робсон поет вместе с Иваном Семеновичем Козловским.
To give you an idea of how highly Robeson was esteemed in Russia, a mountain has been given his name. Yes, a mountain. After this tour, are you going to go back to the United States?
Well, I hope to be here for an extended tour, but as I just said before, one wonderful thing has happened. You must remember that with all the struggles, that I'm very proud to say, that the struggle has been won in my own case, in my own land, in America. And as I pointed out, I have just finished a long concert tour all over America, and as a matter of fact, if I hadn't gotten my passport, I would be now singing in the largest halls in America at the highest prices. So I intend to go back sometime.
Back in America, the civil rights movement was underway. Many of the ideas and principles that Robeson had expressed decades earlier were now being echoed, sadly, by many who didn't even know who Paul Robeson was. Robeson's concert career continued. He also gave his last interpretation of Othello in London. In 1965, tragedy struck. His wife, Islanda, passed away. With the deteriorative disease called arteriosclerosis. He saw only his family and close friends now. No interviews were ever given. Robeson felt that his track record spoke for itself. And who could argue? In his retirement, he watched world events unfold on television. He watched as many of the issues on which he had taken a stand proven right. How ironic it must have been for Robeson to sit and watch American presidents visit Russia and China, especially Richard Nixon, who as a young congressman had been such an avid red baiter and communist hater during those witch hunt days of the 50s. And how good Robeson must have felt as he watched one African nation after another attain the independence that he had advocated for so long. In 1973, a tribute to Paul Robeson was given at New York's Carnegie Hall in celebration of his 75th birthday. It was put together by some of those who loved him and had fought with him down through the years. The proceeds of the tribute were used to establish the Paul Robeson Archives, a non-profit organization that would collect, preserve, and catalog the life work of Paul Robeson. On Friday, January 23rd, 1976, at noon, death claimed Paul Robeson.
But I think that we have all been fortunate to have had this man walk the earth among us. In him, we have had a vision, really, of how beautiful the human race can become. He is a man, as I see it, of the future.
Physical remains of Paul Robeson end here. But what about the man's story? Surely it represents a major chapter in America's history. The tragedy is that story has hardly been told. Mass media has, in fact, suppressed large amounts of information about this man. Despite exhaustive research, we were unable to come up with precious little news film that was shot of this man here in this country. You undoubtedly noticed how much still photographs we had to use. And what little motion picture that we did include in this documentary came from overseas. Not even the Library of Congress has much to offer in film on this man, Paul Robeson. Where is that film, we ask? We also ask, why has his name not been listed in our books? Books about our history, America's history, the history of the Civil Rights Movement, the American arts. We also ask why his name has not been listed on the Football Hall of Fame. Maybe now, in death, his name will rise up again and claim its proper place in our history. Certainly our children should know that story. It is a story of strength and gentleness, commitment and unbending principle.
Stop, you! A word or two before you go. I have done the state some service, and they know it. No more of that. I pray you in your letters, when you shall these unlucky deeds relate, speak of me as I am. Nothing extenuate, nor set down aught in malice. Then must you speak of one that loved full wisely, but too well.
We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We're soldiers